Hello there. Today I'm continuing my look at wines from Bordeaux from the 2022 vintage, provided to me very kindly by the Bordeaux Consulting Group. So the one I'm looking at today is from the Medoc. This is Chateau d'Arcin. It's a Cru Bourgeois, and as I say, from the 2022 vintage. So Chateau d'Arcin is likely to be one of the oldest vineyards in the Medoc, having been developed by the Commandery of the Templars back in the 1400s. It sits on the main road, the D2, about halfway between the appellations of Margaux and Mouly, so more towards the south of the Medoc. Since 1971, the estate's been owned by the Castel Group, who are a large, French-based international producer of wines, beers and soft drinks. So they have, I believe it's actually 21 estates in France, predominantly in Bordeaux, but also in the Loire and in southern France, but also own quite substantial vineyard holdings in Morocco particularly, and in Tunisia. I think also for the Castel family, this is one of the earlier estates that they bought, and the Chateau functioned as a holiday home in Bordeaux for the head of the company, the head of the family, Pierre Castel. Pierre is now 98, and I believe these days lives mostly in Switzerland. But certainly there's a sentimental attachment within the family for Chateau d'Arcin. Castel have also invested quite heavily in the chateau. Back in 1981, in really quite a revolutionary move, they built a circular cellar here, in the centre of which there was a 2030 hectolitre blending tank, and around the outside 20 thermo-regulated stainless steel tanks. So back in 1981, that was really quite groundbreaking, and actually this has served as something of a model for the redevelopment of quite a few of Bordeaux's Cru Classé estates. The cellar also had room for 1,500 new French oak barrels every year. They have 3 years worth, so new barrels, first year and second year barrels, so in total 4,500 barrels, giving them the ability to age the wine here for 12 months. The estate soils are diverse. They have both sandy gravels and limestone rich clays, so the planting of the right variety on the right soil is quite important. In general, the earlier ripening Merlot tends to be planted on the cooler, wetter, clay dominated soils, and Cabernet Sauvignon tends to be planted on the freer draining gravel soils. Viticulture here is certified as sustainable by an organisation called Terra Vitis. And one of the approaches used here is not to use herbicides at all. So they plough beneath all the vine rows to ensure there are no weeds there. And then also for the more friable soils where they grow the Cabernet Sauvignon, they'll plough between the rows as well. So this is a water management technique, where plants are allowed to grow between the rows on the wetter clay soils. There's quite a lot of manual work goes on in the vineyards, with extensive debudding, and then in the run to harvest, de-leafing to expose the fruit. For the Petit Verdot that they have planted here, it's very common as well that they'll green harvest to reduce the crop to advance ripeness for that. Now this is a wine that I would suggest was relatively good value for money and well priced wine. One of the compromises that's been accepted to allow that is the fact that the fruit here is picked by machine. Harvest here started on the 15th of September when the Merlot was picked. The Petit Verdot was picked a week later on the 20th of September, and the Cabernet was harvested on the 3rd of October. Evidently, one of the issues they had to address was quite high levels of alcohol on the Merlot in 2022, so I'm not sure quite how they would have dealt with that. The vinification of the Cabernet Sauvignon has been described as classical. Now 2022 was a vintage which had some really good ripe tannins thanks to warm, dry conditions. So they probably didn't have to work too hard to get good levels of tannin out of the fruit. It's noted that there was a maceration following the ferment, but they also mention that they've kept the fermentation temperatures down to 28 degrees, and that maceration only went on at 26 degrees. So regulating that temperature will have prevented the extraction of too much bitterness from the fruit. 60% of the wine aged in barrel, with 30% of it in new oak, and a further 30% aging in 1 and 2 year old barrels. So you should get a reasonable flavour influence from the oak, and you'll certainly get that influence of gentle oxidation helping to fix colours, tannins and aromas in the wine. Barrel aging lasted for 12 months, but the remaining 40% spent 6 to 8 months in tank with French oak staves included in there. So the purpose of that will be a more cost-effective way of adding some additional oak character to the wine. The wine would then have been blended and bottled. The final blend on this was 58% of Merlot with 39% of Cabernet Sauvignon and just 3% of Petit Verdot added in there. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? Looking at it, it has some really good colour. I mean, that is practically opaque. Swelling it, the wine's label says it has 13.5% alcohol, but it's quite readily forming tears on the side of the glass. And it's not just alcohol and sweetness that can make a wine viscous. Obviously the tannins that have been extracted as well are doing that. So this is a wine which I'm expecting to have some quite good body therefore. Let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are slightly restrained, but there's a juicy combination of red plum and deeper, darker black plum. It's almost into bitter licorice. And then perhaps there's some dusty notes and a little bit of cedary oak there as well. So let's have a taste and see what we make of it. On the palate, that is the most structured of the 2022 clarets that I've tried in these last few tastings. There's a fine, slightly dusty, really quite grainy tannin runs across the mid-palate. The front of the mouth, there's a juicy, dark fruit. It's a dams and bullis, black plum sort of note. That gives way to a more sort of slightly bitter, licoricey note on the mid-palate. The alcohol's nicely in balance. The wine has a medium to full body. It's certainly very structured. The tannins are drying, there's a little bit of bitterness, and they're providing some quite good grip. They're somewhat drying out the back palate there, and leaving me with a slightly earthy, certainly very grainy note. And in that graininess you can see some hints of cedary oak as well. There's quite reasonable freshness. Like I say, there's that sort of plummy note. It's allowing there to be quite lively, more black than red fruit, maybe almost a sort of a note of a concentrated, slightly inky elderberry sort of black fruit, which combines with more savoury notes of, say, black olive, perhaps a little bit of licorice, and some of the cedary touches on the finish there. The finish is relatively structured. It has a fair, if not exceptional, length. Looking at our Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this wine, it scored 89 out of 100, which actually, given its price, is pretty respectable. I think this is a wine that offers both great value for money and actually quite a classic sort of style. This, certainly compared to some of the 2022 wines that have preceded it, has a lot more grip, structure. It probably has the ability to age for 10 years or so. And actually, you probably do want to leave it for a year or two, so that unless you're eating it with a nice big juicy steak, it should have a bit of time to smooth out, soften slightly. But I think even then, it should still have some quite attractive tannic grip. I might almost describe it as being slightly traditional and old-fashioned. I don't mean that in any way as a criticism, but it has quite a classic balance between structure and alcohol, and pretty good freshness to back that up as well. The flavours are relatively straightforward, but the fact that they've got the tannins with them gives the wine quite a reasonable length of finish, even if it does dry out a little at the end. Now, I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so that you can find out where it's available and what its pricing is in your market. And on that page there are also some tabs, and you can use those to find out more about the region it's from, the producer, the grape variety, the winemaking. You can look at what the critics have had to say about it. You can have a look at what other users have had to say about it. You can see the wine's price history, and you can see the awards that it's won. So hopefully there's plenty of information there to help you make an informed decision if you're considering buying this wine. I do have a couple more Bordeaux wines from the 2022 vintage to look at over the next few days, so I do hope you'll be able to join me for the tasting of those. So thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Bye now.